Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to our 83rd Right and Left Discussion Forum. We hold our discussion forums twice monthly to demonstrate that open-minded listening can be a powerful educational tool and will lead to common understanding of difficult issues. Today, our panel will discuss the pros and cons of maintaining the Electoral College as a vehicle for selecting our president and vice president. Today's panel, beginning on my left, is Patty Haskins, retired math teacher and member of the Wadsworth City Council. On her left is Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&B Financial Services. On his left, joining us for the first time, is Charlie Aukerman, a retired journalist and instructor at the University of Akron, plus many other things. The Electoral College was established by Article 2 of the Constitution in 1787 and modified by the 12th Amendment in 1791. It provides for electors from each state whose number is equal to the total of senators and representatives allocated to each state according to population to select the president and vice president. Is this a superior method using the popular vote? I'm screwing this all up. Here's the question, Patty. Is this better than using the popular vote?
Well, I think there's pros and cons on both. Obviously, on the con side, there is concern that when we use the Electoral College, we are not actually looking at the popular vote. For example, in 2000, during that election, Al Gore received more votes than did George W. Bush, but George W. Bush actually won the election because he had more Electoral College votes. That's only happened 3 times in the history of the Electoral College, and the other 2 times were in 1876 and in 1888, I think. So it's not a common problem, but as we can see, it can affect that. There's also concern that if you have the Electoral College, that you have faithless electors. Now, the whole Electoral College system is really supposed to be set up as a deliberation. The electors that are voted for go into a meeting, which is I think it's the first Monday after the second Wednesday in December after the election, and then they are supposed to vote. Now, have they ever deliberated? No. As a matter of fact, they never actually get together to vote. All of the votes are actually mailed in. A faithless elector is one who does not vote for the person for whom they have pledged to vote. Now, there are, I think, 24 states that have punishment laws for those electors that you have. But there is concern about that. There's also the fact that, this one actually cuts both ways, I think, that the Electoral College tends to help rural areas or not as populated areas have more voice, so they're not left behind, so that they have as much count as the cities. But that goes both ways. For example, an elector from California represents 4 times as many votes as an elector from Wyoming. So, is that good or is that bad? I think that may depend upon what your political leanings are or where you happen to be from as to whether that is particularly fair. It does enhance the 2-party system because it does make it even more difficult for a third-party candidate to become elected because they're not going to win more than 1 state or 2 states, even at that. And therefore, any third-party candidate would really have no chance of winning in an election. The interesting thing I found in looking at all of this, though, is that the Electoral College, I always thought it was just automatically, if you win that state, you get all the votes, and it's not the case. In Maine and in Nebraska, they followed. It's a congressional district method, and what they do is in each of those states, they get 2 electors that go with the statewide vote. That's based upon their senators. And then they get 1 vote for each of their representatives who can vote differently than the way the state went. In, I think, Maine it's 2, and in Nebraska it's 3. Now, has that ever made a difference? Only one time, and I believe it was 2008, Obama did win one of the districts in Nebraska, but everything else went to McCain. But that's the only time. Now, these have only been in effect since, I think, 1972 and 1996, so respectively. So it hasn't had a big change, but it is up to the state legislatures to decide how that electoral college will work. And this is even different, for example, on their ballots, with the way the electors are chosen. In some cases, you just see on the ballot in the primary the name of the candidate. In other cases, you see the names of the actual, yes, of who those electors are. And they are selected by different ways, whether it be through a convention, whether it be through the party itself, or the candidate themselves that selects those. So, you know, and write-in candidates, if you want to have a write-in as an elector, you actually have to list the candidate's name and
the elector.
And the elector's name. So you have to know who that person is. So there's all kinds of little problems for and against this. Whether it's a good system, I don't know. There are many different ways proposed to tweak it, like as in Maine or Nebraska. Oh, by the way, one of the things that you mentioned about it's the number of senators and then one electorate for each congressional district. Washington, D.C. does have 3 electoral votes, which is because that's the fewest that any state in the nation has, and so they're given 3.
Yes. There are, I think, 4 other states with only 3.
Yeah.
I mean, Dakota, Wyoming, one of the Dakotas.
And that's how they get to
Wyoming,
538,
Vermont,
which
yeah.
means you need the 270 to win a majority.
Yeah. Bryan, what do you think?
I think it's an ingenious system. It has a little flaw here and there, but for over 200 years, it has served the country well. Obviously, there are some anomalies that Patty's brought up 3 times within that period, that the popular vote was different than what the electors, the Electoral College decided.
You know, actually, there was a 4th time.
Was there?
Yeah, John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson.
Okay.
John Quincy Adams was selected, and he had the minority of both the popular vote and the electoral vote. But there wasn't enough electoral votes to push him into the category. So it went to the House.
That's because neither one had the majority of electoral votes.
So the House then picked the guy that had the minority of both the electoral votes and the popular vote, which should tell you something about the House. But,
yeah. Well, I think if Patty did a great job of explaining how the system is set up, contrary to popular belief, it is not a rigged system. It's well known. It's
only rigged if you've lost.
Well, that's a sore loser category. You know, it's always someone's always got to complain about that. But I think it protects the minority of the country. You know, if right now we'd be more of a left-right coast. You'd have the East Coast and the West Coast determining for the country because of their population centers
and the large cities,
and the large cities
like Chicago.
The large cities would be determining what we do. So for me, it levels the playing field. It's not perfect. I don't think it was meant to be perfect, but there's enough safeguards in it to make sure that the voting goes without any sort of real problem or issue. So I'm really, maybe a few little tweaks here and there. Maybe if you did sort of a proportional type of measure, as the 2 states that have done that, but it's worked. I don't really see a reason. Now, if you listen to some of the folks, Mr. Sanders, who just recently it was determined that the folks on what he thought, the Democratic side, through the emails that came out, it was he would probably want more of a popular vote. The third party, of which he has really been independent. He really hasn't been a Democrat.
No.
But the country's been set up for a 2-party system, and that's a discussion for another day if there's a third party. But I really, maybe some tweaks here and there. But I think if people were to listen to Patty and understood how the system worked, it's ingenious.
If more people would listen to Patty, we'd all be better off.
They would take a civics class. If they listened when they were in high school with the civics class, they would understand how the country's run.
Yeah, Charlie, I know that this is a subject that's near and dear to your heart.
Well, yeah, and you said when we talked on the phone about this, I mentioned that I'm a big supporter of keeping the Electoral College the way it is. I'm not even certain I'm happy about what Maine and Nebraska did. But there is a couple of things. It was a deliberative body at one time, back when it was first started. And that's why we had the election of John Quincy Adams, the way you mentioned, because John Quincy Adams got fewer popular votes than Andy Jackson, but there were three other, actually there were multiple other candidates in that race that just screwed the thing up.
That's why they didn't get
and that's
majority.
why he was elected,
Yeah.
because as you mentioned, I think as you indicated, this talked about the House wasn't really fond of Andy Jackson. So, and they stayed that way when he was president. So, but it's an interesting thing, because I think that the Electoral College actually enhances the election. And here's my argument. I was in Florida in 2000 when the election was held. And I was on vacation, and for 2 weeks they were deliberating down there about hanging chads, if you remember.
Pregnant chads.
And butterfly ballots. Now, I don't know if they ever showed a picture of a butterfly ballot up here, but the newspapers were full of them down there.
Yeah.
They were incomprehensible ballots. You couldn't read them. I mean, one candidate would be on one side of the page, the other candidate would be on the other side of the page, but you voted somewhere down the middle, and it was really a weird system. But I think that what the Electoral College does is prevent endless court challenges. One of the examples is the 1960 election. Now, it turned out that President Kennedy won more votes than Richard Nixon.
Right.
He actually won more states. He won 26 states to 24 states. But you could argue that with such a close election, because he had, in percentage of points, was, let's see, I've got it here. The percentage was 49.7% of the popular vote to 49.3% of the popular vote for Nixon. So you can endlessly battle that over battles all over this country. You would not know who the president was for a long time.
Let me ask you a question. In that case, if Nixon had wanted a recount, which he declined, would they have had to have done a recount precinct by precinct over the
They
entire
would have had
country?
to do a recount precinct by precinct, particularly in the state of Illinois,
Yeah.
because that was the big disputed states. And if he had won Illinois, he would have won the presidency.
Yes.
And he elected, this is one of the things I admire about him. Watergate is not, but anyway, one of the things I admired, he said, no, the country needs to know who the president is. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to order a debate. Because it was well known later on, it was studied later on, and found that there were dead people voting all over Chicago, in that election. But nonetheless, it would have had to have been a precinct by precinct vote like they did in Florida.
And there are 125,000 precincts in the country. Well, you talk about room for mischief.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and there's a cost. I mean, if it's close enough that it's under a certain percentage, and I can't remember it right now, then it's paid for by the Board of Elections. If it's not, then the candidate has to pay for it. So, you could end up with an extreme amount of money being paid out. And Electoral College supposedly will prevent that.
But you mentioned one other thing, Patty, earlier about the major election, which probably should have gone the other way, with Sam Tilden and Rutherford Hayes. Hayes was given the presidency even though he lost the popular vote. He was given the presidency because a special commission determined that there were 20 delegates to the they disputed over 20 delegates to the Electoral College, and the commission ruled in favor of Hayes. And as part of the, quote, deal, if you will, Reconstruction ended in the South. Radical Reconstruction ended in the South. If you elect our guy if you name him instead of Tilden, then we'll end the Reconstruction. So that's when the Reconstruction ended.
Wow.
And there probably was the shadiest deal in American politics, you know, if you want to look at it that way.
That we know of.
Now, there are two of you who think that the Electoral College is a good way to select a president. I couldn't tell, Patty, how you felt. Yes or no?
I think it's the best way that we have right now overall.
Yeah.
Okay.
It does bother me that the popular vote, in some cases, is not expressed there. But overall, I think it has functioned well. You know, there's only been a few times.
Yeah.
Where
There are two things that stick in my mind. We talked about the number of states that receive only 3 electoral votes, and I don't know, there are 5 or 6. But you add up their populations. There are 3 million registered voters in that group of states, and together, there are 7 states because they get 21 electoral votes with 3 million voters. Florida gets 21 electoral votes with 9 million voters.
right, and that was my example with California and Wyoming, and that is discouraging to people, you know, because you think, you know, one person, one vote, but because of the way the Electoral College system is set up, some people's vote counts more than others, and
Yes.
that is of a concern. Now, is there a better way to tweak it? I don't know.
The other thing, and also involving the state of California, is that most of the time, or any state that is solidly blue or red, candidates don't pay much attention to those states. They're not going to spend their money trying to win them.
Oh, right, right.
And states like California, you know, the people think that our interests are not even considered in the election. You know, we've got things with water and technology and all, but nobody pays attention to us.
You pay only attention to the swing states, and that's very obvious. Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, New Hampshire, Georgia,
But
Iowa.
Look how things would change, though, if we had a popular vote and all those votes in California would count.
Exactly. But right now that they don't. And so there are states that are always red, there are states that are always blue. Candidates don't go there. And unfortunately, I think that hurts the voter in those states because they don't get the knowledge they should about the candidates, you know, for the election. Of course, so this day of media, I'm not sure who doesn't. Of course, the other side of that, sometimes it'd be nice to not get 27 million robocalls and so much junk mail because we are a swing state.
But it also brings up one of the arguments against the Electoral College in that it helps suppress the voting turnout.
Some people just don't bother to go out because
Why would you?
Why
My
would I
state
bother?
doesn't count. Yeah.
You know, I live in a traditionally blue state. Why would I bother to go out and vote for the Republican because that Democrat is going to win anyway? And that's very true.
I put that argument in the same category as disenfranchising voters. I look at, you know, our good friends on the other side of the aisle like to talk about voter disenfranchisement, making it very difficult for people to vote because of voter ID or something of that.
Yeah.
And then here on the other side of the aisle, you know, we talk about voter fraud. Charlie brought up about Chicago. I guess the joke is, you know, in Chicago, vote early and often. You know, take your grandma who's passed away, you know, 10 years ago. Make sure she votes too. So I look at that and I say it equals out. I really wonder, you know, how much suppression there is. I think people need to really get educated. I'm for educating the voter. And if you can't figure out how to register to vote, you need to see Patty. And if you can't figure that out, then maybe you shouldn't be voting.
Well,
there's a certain level of knowledge that I believe you should be aware of, and it starts with And I don't think it's that. Maybe we could have a program on how do you register to vote, and in Ohio. It's not that difficult.
No, but that's
Okay.
Ohio, and just recently, I mean, it was at North Carolina or South Carolina, and in Texas. There, the courts came back and said, "Listen, this is a direct attempt to prevent people from voting." The disenfranchisement, I think, has gone up while the fraud has gone down. They really have. We do not have the Chicagos of the past. The interesting thing, one of the ways, and this is a little off the subject, but one of the ways that you could encourage people to vote more would be to have it on the weekends. People don't have to leave work. And I find it interesting that we vote on Tuesday, and I guess originally the idea was you couldn't vote on Sunday because you had to go to church, so you wouldn't do it then. And then Monday, it took you that long to get to the voting place by horse and buggy, so that's why they vote on Tuesday.
But the argument would be, how many days can you vote absentee in the state of Ohio?
39, I think.
39 days.
Oh no, it's less than a month now.
But
it
still,
is?
Yeah, I think
nobody is pigeonholed into voting on Tuesday. You can vote pretty much in that 30-day period of time. Because we were going to be out of town.
I'm going to shut you
We
down
went
because that's a whole nother argument.
Isn't Oregon all mail votes now?
Oregon, I was just about to mention that. Oregon does everything by mail.
Yeah.
They don't even go to a voting place.
Yeah.
Wow, that saves a lot of money, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
saves a lot of time.
They've
and a lot
done
of
that
money.
for a couple of years now.
And if you believe in the post office, then that would work. I mean, I think there's a lot of systems out there.
Yeah, there's ways to do it.
There's ways to do
That
it.
business in Chicago about dead people voting worked in reverse for my mother. She showed up to vote in her 80s, and they told her she was deceased and couldn't vote. By the time she got home, there were vans from 3 TV stations at her house.
I want to go back to a point that both Bryan and
Patty.
have made. And that's this. I am not certain. We mentioned just before we did the program that a lot of this debate hinges upon what you think the country is, or the system the country runs under. And we run under a republic. Most people, if you ask them in the street, say we're a democracy, which we are not. We never have been and probably never will be, hopefully. But anyway, I think there's a lot of confusion about that. And I don't know. I don't want to blame. I haven't been in a high school classroom for years. Okay, I'm at the college level now, and it's a little different. But I will tell you this: most students coming into college have no idea what American government is.
I know.
Why? I don't know.
And that's sad.
But here's the saddest part: some states don't even require you to have high school or government taught in high school. It's an elective course.
Oh, you're kidding.
I am not kidding.
Yeah.
Oh. I know
One of
Ohio
them,
does.
I will tell you, is New Jersey.
Wow.
And
Well,
I've
let's
talked
see
to
who's been
political
running that
scientists.
state.
I have talked to political scientists who teach in college levels in New Jersey, and they say the appalling lack of knowledge of people coming in about how our government works is amazing.
Well,
Yeah.
the basic thing is we have representatives, and that's what makes it, if it's we elect representatives who go to Congress and vote. That's not a democracy.
Right.
In a democracy, everybody would have to show up for everything.
Right.
So,
My wife was driving to New York to visit our daughter, and she stopped at a gas station in New Jersey and asked how far was it to the New York line. And the woman said, "Oh, the Ben Franklin Bridge is about 5 miles." And she said, "Do you mean the George Washington Bridge?" She said, "Yes." And the girl said, "Oh, I knew it was one of those presidents." Anyway, Charlie, I've got to ask you this question. There is a bill out there. It's a state-by-state bill. It's a popular vote bill, and
Right.
it started in California.
Right.
Can you explain how that works? Because I'm not sure.
I don't know that I can explain it, but I will tell you strange bills start in California a lot. And I can tell you that if they can get a certain amount to do to make it a constitutional amendment, then we're all stuck. I think we're going to be stuck. I am not a big supporter of the 17th Amendment, which changed the way the senators were elected. I mean, we didn't elect senators up until the
they were
17th
chosen.
Amendment.
Yeah.
They were appointed by the states. What
Right.
that amendment did was take the states right out of the Constitution. They have no say. Now it's all popular vote.
Yeah.
So actually,
Yeah.
we've made it more democratic, the country more democratic, but we've altered what the original argument was, our system was like. So we'll go, I don't want to talk about that.
Well, as I
But
understand,
I will say this on the amendment. California starts a lot of strange amendments. Fortunately, the rest of the states are smart enough not to adopt them.
as I understand this popular vote bill, that a state legislature agrees that all of the electoral votes of their state will be cast for the candidate who won the nationwide popular vote.
Okay.
Okay, and that
Wow,
there are,
that's
I
interesting.
forget how many states now have adopted that, but that's kind of an interesting take on the.
I think 7. I think it's 7 if I
With-
remember correctly.
So that in essence gets rid of the electoral college then, does it?
No, it
Not-
has
Yeah.
the electoral college following the popular vote of the country.
You know,
It-
there's,
Not
what
the
it eliminates
popular
is
vote of the
it
state.
eliminates swing states. That's what it does.
Okay,
there's nothing that says that an elector has to vote for the candidate he's pledged to in any case.
Yeah.
right, that's the faithless vote.
And
Yeah.
we might see that in this election, although, you know, the danger of this election bothers me a lot. I mean, this election bothers me. But I don't know what we'll see in this case, in the election. I mean, this one's upsetting all of the predictions. There's a great book out called Predicting the Presidency. And it's written by a professor named Alan Lichtman. He's got 13 keys. They've predicted every election since 1960 when he started, correctly, long before the election. This year, I'd throw the book out the window.
You have to.
Well, I'm not holding my breath that we're not going to have faithless electors this time. When you've got such hard feelings by so many people, so forth. Well, anyway, thank you. I want to end with a quote that is pretty obsolete by now, but the Electoral College was intended to be a deliberative body, and it's not. When electors cast their ballots these days, they aren't even expected to think at all. That was by Eric Jensen, Cleveland Plain Dealer. Thank you, folks.